Ethan Walker stood at the entrance of his barn, his fingers curling into fists at the sight before him. The early morning air carried the scent of damp hay and fresh earth, a familiar comfort now overshadowed by frustration. Nestled in the rolling countryside of a quiet Midwestern town, his family's farm had been in his possession for years, a place of hard work and solitude. Until now. The shiny white SUV sat smugly in the middle of his hay storage area, as if it belonged there. The afternoon sun reflected off the vehicle's spotless exterior, making the personalized vanity plate, Amanda, glisten like a cruel joke. His right eye twitched. Not again. Not this time. He had given Amanda, his entitled neighbor, more than enough chances. At first, he had let slide. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe she just needed a place to park for a short time. The first time she had done it, she had said, "Oh, Ethan, it was just for a couple of hours. I was running late for an appointment, and your barn was open." The second time, her excuse was slightly different. "My driveway is being sealed, and I have nowhere else to park." "You don't mind, do you?" Ethan had gritted his teeth, but let it go, warning her that it was his property and she needed to ask first. The third time, however, was beyond ridiculous. "Your barn has such nice shade, Ethan. I didn't want my leather seats getting too hot." That was when Ethan knew Amanda didn't just see his barn as a one-time favor. She saw it as a convenience. And the more he let it slide, the worse it got. Now, standing there once again, he saw the final insult. A neatly taped note on his barn door. "Ethan, I'll pick it up Monday. Don't touch my car. It's new, and I don't want dust on it." Ethan read it again. Monday. It was Friday. Amanda had decided, without asking, that she could use his barn as her personal parking garage for the entire weekend. She had always treated the neighborhood as her own playground, disregarding boundaries and assuming special privileges. Whether it was using other people's driveways, borrowing tools without asking, or ignoring property lines, Amanda had a history of entitlement that made this latest stunt unsurprising. As if he were her valet. As if his property was hers to do with as she pleased. His jaw clenched so hard it hurt. His pulse pounded in his ears. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to Amanda's contact, his thumb hovering over the call button. But then he stopped. He already knew how this would go. She would answer in her usual fake sweet voice, acting like she had no idea why he was upset. She'd feign surprise, laugh it off, say something like, "Oh, Ethan, don't be so dramatic. It's just a car and a barn. You have so much space." Then she'd guilt trip him. "Oh, I'm already in town. Can't you just leave it for a couple of days? You're not even using that space right now." And if he pushed back, she'd change tactics. "Wow, Ethan, I didn't think you were such a selfish neighbor. It's just a car. Are you really this petty?" "No, not this time." He inhaled deeply, his eyes drifting to the padlock hanging on the side of the barn door. And then an idea formed in his mind. Slow, sweet, satisfying. Ethan reached for the heavy wooden barn doors, grabbed the padlock, and swung them shut with a definitive bang. Then, with the calm precision of a man who had finally had enough, he secured the lock with a satisfying click. Amanda wasn't getting her car until Monday, just like she had planned. With that done, Ethan turned on his heel, whistling a light-hearted tune as he tossed his weekend bag into his truck. He had been planning this fishing trip for a while, and now, the idea of being completely unreachable for the next 2 days sounded better than ever. As he drove off down the gravel road, his phone began buzzing in his pocket. Amanda. He ignored it. By the time he reached the highway, she had called 5 times. By the time he arrived at his lakeside cabin, his voicemail was full of messages, each one more frantic than the last. The first was lighthearted. "Hey, Ethan, I just noticed you locked my car in your barn. Haha, funny joke. Now unlock it." The second was less amused. "Ethan, seriously, I need my car. Unlock the barn now." The third? Pure rage. "Ethan Walker, I know you're ignoring me. You think this is funny? This is a crime. I will call the police." Ethan stretched out on the wooden dock of his cabin, cracked open a cold Bud Light, his favorite after a long week, and let the lake breeze wash over him. The sun warmed his skin. The scent of pine and fresh water drifted through the air, and the distant call of a loon echoed across the lake. For the first time in ages, he could fully relax, savoring the stillness around him. It had been far too long since he had felt this peaceful. No nagging, no entitled demands, just the sound of nature and the knowledge that somewhere, miles away, Amanda was absolutely losing her mind. And Ethan? He couldn't remember the last time he had enjoyed a weekend this much. Ethan pulled into his driveway early Monday morning, feeling completely refreshed after his peaceful weekend away. But the moment he stepped out of his truck, reality hit him like a freight train. Flashing red and blue lights filled his vision. A police car sat parked near his barn, its presence a stark contrast to the tranquility he had just left behind. Amanda stood in front of the barn, her arms flailing wildly as she shouted into her phone. Her face was flushed an angry shade of red, and she was stomping back and forth like a caged animal. Ethan sighed, already knowing how this was going to play out. There he is. Amanda screeched the moment she spotted him. Arrest him. The officer, leaning against his patrol car with the resigned look of someone accustomed to dealing with absurd disputes, glanced over at Ethan. For what? Ethan asked, his tone calm and measured. For stealing my car. Amanda howled, pointing an accusatory finger at him. The officer sighed, rubbing his temples as if he already regretted taking this call. Ma'am, your car is inside his barn, on his private property. That's not theft. Amanda's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. But he locked it in there. That's illegal. Ethan smirked, folding his arms. So let me get this straight. I locked my own barn on my own land, and that's a crime. The officer's lip twitched, as if he was trying not to laugh. Amanda's shrill voice broke through the morning air as she stomped toward Ethan, her face contorted with fury. You think this is funny, Ethan? You're going to regret this. Ethan, still calm, turned to the officer. So, officer, what exactly is the issue here? The officer sighed. Ma'am claims you've unlawfully detained her car. Ethan held up Amanda's note. She said she'd pick it up Monday. Today's Monday. I just followed her instructions. The officer glanced at the note, exhaled sharply, and looked at Amanda. Ma'am, this note clearly states you left your vehicle here voluntarily. Amanda's mouth opened and closed again. That's not the point. He locked it in. The officer raised an eyebrow. And? It's his barn, his property. You trespassed. If anyone should be pressing charges, it's him. Ethan smirked. Actually, officer, now that you mention it, I'd like to report a case of trespassing. Amanda let out a strangled sound of pure outrage. You wouldn't dare. Ethan simply crossed his arms. I absolutely would. The officer gave Amanda a pointed look. Ma'am, if I were you, I'd take my car and leave before this situation gets worse for you. Amanda's hands trembled with rage as she marched to the barn doors, yanking at the lock. Open it. Now. Taking his sweet time, Ethan stretched, adjusted his hat, and finished the last sip of his coffee before walking over. He could hear Amanda muttering angrily under her breath, stomping her foot like a spoiled child throwing a tantrum at a county fair. When he finally unlocked the doors, Amanda lunged forward, yanking her SUV's driver's side door open. But before she could climb inside, chaos erupted. A family of raccoons had taken residence in her car over the weekend. The moment the door opened, they hissed, their beady eyes glaring at the sudden intruder. Amanda shrieked in horror, stumbling backward and landing right into a pile of hay. A particularly chubby raccoon, seemingly unfazed by her dramatic reaction, hopped onto the passenger seat, nibbling on an open granola bar she had left behind. Another tore into the leather upholstery with glee, leaving claw marks across her precious new car interior. Ethan couldn't help it. He burst into laughter. The officer, who had been suppressing his amusement, finally let out a chuckle as well. Amanda scrambled to her feet, her designer clothes covered in hay and dust. This isn't funny, Ethan. You set this up. Ethan wiped away a tear from laughing so hard. Oh yeah, Amanda, because I trained wild raccoons to shred your leather seats and turn your SUV into a trash panda palace. Sure. The officer chuckled. Well, ma'am, I'd say you have an even bigger problem now. You might want to call animal control. Amanda's face turned redder than ever. You, get them out. Now, Ethan shook his head. Nope. You told me not to touch your car, remember? Amanda let out an exasperated groan and threw her hands in the air. Grabbing a stick from the ground, she poked at the raccoons, who responded with louder hisses and a dramatic leap toward her. She screamed again, dropping the stick and retreating as the biggest raccoon waddled out with a granola bar still in its paws. These are diseased creatures, she yelled, as if that would make them leave faster. By the time she finally got the raccoons to scurry off into the nearby woods, Amanda looked like a mess, hair disheveled, clothes dirty, and her pride completely shattered. She climbed into her SUV, glaring daggers at Ethan. This isn't over. Ethan shrugged. We'll see. With a sharp turn of the wheel, Amanda sped off down the road, leaving behind a trail of dust and what little dignity she had left. The officer turned to Ethan, shaking his head with a chuckle. I've been on the force for years, and that might have been the funniest thing I've ever seen. Ethan smirked. Glad I could entertain. But Amanda wasn't done yet. 2 days later, Ethan received an official-looking letter in the mail. She was suing him. The claims? Emotional distress, unlawful imprisonment of her vehicle, and property damages caused by the raccoons. She demanded $50,000 in compensation, claiming her SUV, bought during a Black Friday sale, was now ruined beyond repair. Ethan laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. Instead of stressing, he did the one thing he knew would make this even more entertaining. He showed up to court, ready to watch Amanda crash and burn. The small-town courthouse was packed the day of the hearing. Amanda, dressed in an over-the-top power suit and flanked by a slick-haired lawyer she must have paid a fortune for, strutted inside like she was about to win the lawsuit of the century. As soon as the judge took his seat, she launched into her dramatic speech. Your Honor, I have suffered greatly at the hands of this man. Not only did he trap my vehicle in his barn, but he also maliciously allowed disease-ridden animals to invade my car, causing irreversible damage and severe trauma. I haven't slept in days thinking about those filthy paws all over my leather seats. Ethan had to bite the inside of his cheek to keep from laughing. The crowd in the gallery, mostly locals who had heard the rumors, whispered and snickered. The judge raised an eyebrow. Do you have evidence that Mr. Walker intentionally placed the animals inside your vehicle? Amanda hesitated for a fraction of a second before stammering. The circumstances make it obvious. He locked the barn, and somehow raccoons ended up inside. It's clear he planned this. Ethan cleared his throat. Your Honor, if I may. He pulled out his security footage, playing the recording that showed Amanda parking her own car, leaving the note, and walking away. Then came the best part. The raccoons sneaking into her SUV through an open window after she left, one of them dragging her half-eaten granola bar like a trophy. The courtroom erupted in muffled laughter as the chubby raccoon flopped onto the driver's seat, leaving muddy paw prints everywhere. The judge leaned forward, watching carefully. When the footage ended, he sat back with an unimpressed expression. Miss Thompson, this footage proves that the raccoons entered your car voluntarily. Mr. Walker had nothing to do with it. Amanda's face went pale. But, he still locked it in there. He should have called me first. The judge exhaled through his nose. He locked his own property. You left your car there voluntarily. If anything, you were trespassing. Amanda sputtered. This is ridiculous. He knew it would inconvenience me. The judge gave her a long, tired look. Miss Thompson, your case is dismissed. The gavel slammed down. The gallery burst into applause, a few people even whistling as Amanda's lawyer whispered something in her ear, looking defeated. Ethan stood up, tipping his hat. Good luck with that emotional distress, Amanda. She stormed out of the courtroom, fuming, her high heels clicking loudly against the floor. A week later, the town was buzzing about Amanda's humiliating loss. But the real karma came when a tow truck arrived at Amanda's house. Greg, her soon-to-be ex-husband, had one final surprise. He repossessed the SUV. Turns out, the car wasn't even in her name. It was his, and he'd had enough of her antics too. Amanda screamed, protested, even tried to block the tow truck from leaving, waving her arms like a madwoman on a reality TV show. But there was nothing she could do. Ethan watched from his porch, sipping his coffee with a satisfied grin. Later that afternoon, he nailed a bright red, "No parking" sign to the front of his barn, just to make sure the message was crystal clear. For the first time in years, his barn stayed empty. No entitled neighbor. No stolen parking spot. Just peace and quiet at last. That evening, he stopped by the local bar, where his buddies roared with laughter as he recounted the tale over a round of beers. "You should have seen her face when those raccoons jumped out," he said, grinning. "Best weekend I've had in years." Life lessons from this story. Respect boundaries. Just because something is accessible doesn't mean it belongs to you. Amanda assumed Ethan's barn was free parking, disregarding the fact that it was his property. Actions have consequences. Amanda ignored multiple warnings and kept taking advantage of Ethan's patience. In the end, her entitlement backfired spectacularly. Patience has limits. Ethan gave Amanda many chances, but when someone repeatedly disrespects you, it's okay to stand your ground. Karma is inevitable. Amanda thought she could get away with her behavior, but karma had other plans. Her recklessness cost her her dignity, her car, and even her marriage. The power of composure. Instead of arguing, Ethan handled the situation strategically and legally, proving that sometimes the best revenge is letting people destroy themselves. Personal perspective. From a personal standpoint, this story is both hilarious and eye-opening. It reminds me of countless real-life tales where entitled people push boundaries until they finally face consequences. Have you ever had a neighbor or coworker who acted like Amanda? Maybe someone who borrowed your parking spot or locked you out of your own space. What's the wildest revenge you've ever pulled or wish you had? Share your experiences in the comments below. We've all encountered entitled people at some point, whether at work, in our neighborhood, or even in our own families. What makes this story satisfying is that Ethan stood up for himself in a way that was both clever and justified. It's a great reminder that while kindness is important, it shouldn't be mistaken for weakness. What do you think? How would you have handled Amanda? Let's discuss in the comments. If you enjoyed this story and love hearing about entitled people getting what they deserve, make sure to subscribe to Story Precious. We bring you the most entertaining, dramatic, and thought-provoking stories that will keep you hooked. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new video. Like, share, and comment to support our channel and help us grow. Subscribe now and be part of the Story Precious community.